And what's another question that you often are asked when it comes to the authority of Scripture, the trustworthiness of Scripture? What's another one that you receive a lot?
Well, you can talk about textual purity and textual accuracy, but at the end of the day, if a book is copied consistently and accurately, and I think that is, my understanding of the Hebrew and the Greek Bible, that it is copied with a tremendous fidelity and accuracy, unparalleled in the ancient world. There's no other collection of books that comes even close to the textual fidelity. But are they accurate in the sense of what they say? Because a book might be copied accurately, but it might be totally spurious historically. And so when you talk about the historical accuracy of the Bible, that's something removed even from textual criticism in a sense, because it could still be talking about stuff that's not true. So people say, about archaeology or about history, does the Bible actually make sense? Is it true? Can it be tested? I would say absolutely, and I'm convinced of this just from studying the Bible for years. The questions that I have come to ask have always been answered, even from the text or from a careful study of it. And I've seen things verified, in church history or in the history of archaeology that were questions for previous generations.
Okay.
And I think a lot of the questions we have may be due to what we don't know about the ancient world. And so we come to conclusions that the Bible is inaccurate because it alone says something about the ancient world.
Okay.
And that's something of a hermeneutical bias, that the Bible is always inaccurate unless it's verified. I don't think there's any other ancient work that has to undergo that. Certainly you would look for verification, but in the ancient world, very often we only have one account of something. But the archaeologist and the historian doesn't say, well, it can't be trusted then. But when it comes to the Bible, people are very skeptical. And I think that's a spiritual blindness.
Perhaps it's also understandable because the Bible makes outstanding claims about seas parting and miraculous events. So perhaps it's a bit warranted.
Perhaps if that's your worldview, that you cannot accept that God could ever do those things. But questions about the accuracy of the Bible in history are interesting. When we look at people that are mentioned in the Bible and not outside of history, for a long time these were assumed to be just inaccurate, that the Bible was making stuff up. There were people like the king of Babylon, Belshazzar. No mention of that in the Babylonian history or the Greek histories of Babylon. And so people for a long time said, well, this is an evidence that the book of Daniel was not written by someone in Babylon, but was written later on, and it's inaccurate. People are the person who wrote this didn't understand Babylonian history. But in the 19th century, in the 20th century, inscriptions were found and translated that clearly show that Belshazzar was the king of Babylon, specifically at the time that Daniel speaks about in Daniel 5, when the Babylonians they fell to the Medo-Persian coalition. And so things like that really, I think, show that if something in the Bible, is not seen outside of the Bible, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. There's lots of people like Sargon. He was only mentioned in Isaiah. People assumed he never existed until they found his palace in Syria. There's people that are mentioned in the Bible from extra biblical sources like David, Hezekiah, Jehu, Ahaz, all these people that for one time or another were only seen in Scripture. Now we have extra biblical records for them.
You give a list there of some people, some individuals that were mentioned in the Scripture, but substantiating evidence wasn't found over a long period of time for their existence. But in time, they were validated. Any other examples of that?
There are. I mean, we could spend the whole day talking about archaeology and how many things people have discovered that do support the veracity of the historicity of the Bible. We can talk about missing people. We can also talk about missing peoples. Whole nations mentioned in the Bible that there was no archaeological record of.
Okay.
The Hittites, the Horites, these people that are mentioned in Joshua, no record in history. The conclusion? The Bible's making it up. It's not there. There was never anyone called Hittites. The 20th century, archaeological finds in Turkey and in Syria have, uncovered massive civilizations for the Hittites, showing that they would have been in Canaan in the time of the conquest, and they would have been very influential Their civilization, we learned so much about that from archaeological digs. The Horites, as late as the 90s, 1993 I think, massive excavations revealing their civilization. And so it's not just you have certain individuals that the Bible mentions, you have whole peoples.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see that even the most primitive books in the Bible, the Pentateuch and the books of Joshua
Sure.
and Ruth, the books that have probably undergone the most scrutiny and the most skepticism, time and time again, they actually have probably more historical information validated from them than any other section of the Bible, which is interesting. You can even look at the Torah, the book of Genesis, remarkable insights into cultures that we're only learning about. And I think one of the things in Scripture, especially when we talk about its accuracy, is that it's a trajectory. You have a consistent accuracy from beginning to end.
Isn't that nice?
It is nice.
It's not that it kind of
Right.
matured and got
Exactly.
better as it got along.
The
Yeah.
light became clearer or
Yeah.
something. Right. You can even talk about inflation prices in the Bible, validated from financial records in the ancient world. What am I talking about?
What are you talking about, Shane?
The price of slaves.
Yeah.
You know, if someone is writing in the 15th century BC and they talk about someone being sold as a slave, you'd think that they would be accurate to the current price of a slave in their time. If someone's writing in the Persian period, you know, and they're trying to write about something that happened back in the days of Moses, you know, how would they know how much a slave cost?
Yeah.
There's no record of them having kept these records. The price of a slave in the Persian period would have been about 160 shekels. The price of a slave in the days of Abraham would have been 10 shekels. When you get to the books of Genesis, you see Joseph sold into slavery. He's sold in the book of Genesis for 20 shekels. We have the Mari archives, which date from the same period that Joseph would have been alive,
Yeah.
and they give the price for a slave at 20 shekels. You look at the days of Moses in the 15th century BC, he talks about the price of slave at 30 shekels. That is also affirmed by archives from Palestine and from Egypt. 30 shekels. So you see the steady increase. You look at the time of Assyria, in 2 Kings, prices of redeeming people from slavery is set at 50 shekels. We know from Assyrian records that the price of a slave was 50 shekels. And so it's interesting. You see this accuracy not only rooted in broad details, but in the price of something. If you ask me how much the price of a cinema ticket was when I grew up, it would be a lot different to now. And it shows an accuracy. It shows that there are people writing in the time that they describe, and they're recording things even as minute as the price of slavery, and we see the inflation of those prices accurately reflected in the biblical record. And that's stuff that's attested from financial records, because one of the curious things about ancient history is that financial records, they tend to last a lot.
Yeah.
People were very, very careful about writing down the cost of things, and so those are things we can validate from extra biblical sources.
And so much of the accusations, especially of the Pentateuch, is that it was all created as kind of a back history for the Israelite people. And so you're saying that, you know, perhaps insignificant details.
Insignificant details are very important.
Yeah, okay. So
Because
it's not an anachronistic thing.
It's not. And you're not talking about huge things that kind of anybody would have known in ancient history. There was a pharaoh in Egypt. Well, you know, pretty much most people in the ancient world would have known that.
Sure.
But the whole problem with the Pentateuch, that people rejected that there could have been someone like Moses that had written the bulk of it, the substantial part of the Pentateuch. The problem with that was rooted again in what they didn't know of the ancient world, particularly in the 19th century, where people assumed that literacy among a slave population living, you know, in Egypt, going through Sinai and eventually ended up in Canaan, there is no way that they would have been able to produce a book or a series of books like the Pentateuch, because from their point of view there was no record of this. What this history shows, it absolutely shows us that literacy in Canaan was very advanced, hundreds of years even before Moses was born. I think one of the most curious things that point to the fallacy of assuming illiteracy amongst the Hebrews is the evidence of slaves writing a very similar language to Hebrew, Proto-Canaanite or Proto-Syriatic script, in mines in Sinai. in around the same time as Moses, and probably about 100 to 200 years before him. And these are in the turquoise mines in Sinai. These are Canaanite slaves that were working for the Egyptians, and they're writing prayers to their gods. They're writing, you know, the names of people. And it's not that this is something produced in a scriptorium. These are people in a slave condition in a mine, writing on the mine shafts and the mine walls. And so things like that have completely blown apart this idea that there's no way that a people like the Jews could have produced a book like this. So the basis isn't there.
Yeah.
And when you looked at the evidence, the details in the Pentateuch, they definitely point to an accuracy. So yeah, I think that's worthwhile.
That's encouraging. And not that our faith is based upon the ability of Canaanite slaves to write.
Right.
Yet it is exciting to see that it's not just this out of this world claim.
Yes.
But that's what they were doing back then.
Absolutely.